Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Welcome to this year's Hannah's Bookukkah, where I post for all 8 nights of the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. There are many people celebrating today, some marking Christmas in a whole variety of ways, some lighting the first candle on our menorahs, and some may have marked the solstice just a few days ago, promising the slow return of the light, even though we still have many dark days to get through. Happy holidays to all of you. In the spirit of all the celebrations, in this first installment of Bookukkah, I want to respond to one of the many wonderful holiday tags that have been going around during this season. Originally, this particular tag was called the Christmas Joy Booktube Tag and put together by Sandy at Sandy Says Read. I'm going to edit it slightly and call it the Holiday Joy Booktube Tag and open up the questions to also include Hanukkah, solstice, or whatever you celebrate. I hope you won't mind, Sandy. Let's get straight to the prompts. Number 1 is to share a favorite festive beverage. I am drinking what, when I was a child, we called Russian tea. We always made it during the holiday season, and when we found out that it was, in fact, not really especially Russian, we changed and started calling it Christmas tea. Basically, it's sweetened, spiced black tea with citrus. I usually start by juicing a few oranges, saving the juice in a mug to add later, and putting the rinds in a pot with boiling water. I add cinnamon, cloves, sometimes a little knob of ginger, and let it all sooge, as my grandmother used to say, for 5 or 10 minutes or so in the boiling water. At some point, I add tea bags and turn off the heat and put the cover on the pot. After another 5 minutes or so, I take the tea bags out and add the juice. You can then sweeten the whole pot, or if you're like my family of origin, you might prefer to let each person sweeten their own, using whatever amount and type of sweetener they choose. And after your celebration, put whatever's left in the refrigerator. The tea is great cold, or you can easily reheat it. You can also make Cheater's holiday tea by using some tea bag of spiced tea, like Constant Comment, which I grew up with, or anything else, and squeezing in some bottled lemon juice. It isn't as good, but it will do if you're about to film something for YouTube. The second question is broken into 2 parts. First, what's a holiday book or story you remember a parent or teacher reading to you when you were a kid? The holiday story I remember most vividly from my childhood was a story about Granny Glittens and her amazing mittens, which was one story in an anthology of holiday stories. It's a very sweet story about a grandmother who knits special flavors of mittens for the people she loves. My own grandmother, whom I also called Granny, was also an amazing knitter. And I always thought of her when I read that story. When I decided I wanted to mention the book on BookTube, I could not remember who the author of the story was or what book it was from, although I remembered that the volume was significantly taller than it was wide. I had no idea how to find a copy and assumed it was out of print. But, of course, YouTube is magic and seems to cater to my every whim. And I will link below to a reading of the story where you can see the illustrations down in the comments. If you are a knitter or a yarn dyer, don't miss this story. Okay, the second part of prompt 2 is to talk about a holiday story or book you enjoy or find yourself returning to each year. I'm going to name favorite Hanukkah books that David and I used to read to our son when he was a child, and which I still love to reread during this season. These are books neither of us grew up with. They were published a little too late, but which we grew to love. The first is How Mindy Saved Hanukkah by Eric Kimmel, illustrated by Barbara McClintock. Actually, I think we first picked up the book because the father pictured on the cover looks very much like my husband looked at the time. And the story is equally charming. I'm a sucker for books about tiny people or animals that establish households inside other full-sized homes. Mindy Klein and her family live behind the walls of the Eldred Street Synagogue, where they forage from the detritus they find around the shul. In this story, Mindy's father left their little house to find one full-size candle to bring home, which they could melt to make enough candles for their tiny menorah for the entire holiday. Sadly, he had a run-in with the synagogue's new cat. But eventually, the brave Mindy, with the help of her Zadie, or grandfather, carrying a piece of pickled herring, braved the cat and brought home a candle. The book is filled with allusions to the traditional Hanukkah story, some of which are quite clever. My very favorite part, though, is during the holiday party the family holds at the end, they invite friends and neighbors. The Pinquenas from Shereth, Israel, the Catans who were visiting from Jerusalem, and the Littles from Temple Emmanuel. Although Kimmel doesn't point it out directly, those familiar with the Jewish diaspora might recognize that all of these names from different language traditions mean small, from Yiddish to Ladino to Hebrew. The names of the synagogues those families attend also tell us about their backgrounds, with the English-named Littles family attending a more assimilated Reform synagogue. My family also really loved another Eric Kimmel book, Herschel and the Hanukkah Goblins, illustrated by the great illustrator Trina Shart Hyman, about a traveler who outsmarts a group of goblins who've colonized a local synagogue in Eastern Europe and prevented the village from celebrating Hanukkah. I won't go into detail, but the story is somewhere between scary and funny, and the illustrations of the goblins cast a perfect mood for the text. The theme is dual, the banishing of dark and the celebration of light, but also the fight against anti-Semitism, allowing the community to worship the way they wish. The last Hanukkah book I'll mention is All of a Kind Hanukkah, put together by Emily Jenkins and Paul Zielinski, and it is, of course, based on the classic books by Sidney Taylor. I grew up reading Taylor's books, short text-based stories, somewhat like the Little House on the Prairie books in some ways, about an immigrant family living on New York's Lower East Side. Taylor's books are quite wonderful, and this picture book is a lovely tribute where the five sisters join together to cook a Hanukkah feast, including making latkes and lighting the candles. If you love the All of a Kind family books, you might also be interested in the 2021 biography of the author Sidney Taylor, written by June Clemens and published by Yale University Press. Onwards to question number 3. Has your favorite author written a holiday story? Honestly, I don't know that I really have one favorite author. George Eliot might be a candidate, and although I haven't read her short novel Silas Marner yet, I gather the storyline is set during the season from Christmas to New Year's. On top of that, it's about the coming of a child, echoing the Christmas story. Question 4. Who is your favorite character from a holiday book, history, movie, etc.? Tell us about that person or critter. I'm going to name the family servant Hannah Mullet in Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Little Women is not a holiday book per se, but it certainly has memorable Christmas scenes in it. Hannah was the immigrant housekeeper who lives with the Marches. She's both warmly loving and utterly no nonsense. But that's not the only contradiction here. She sometimes seems like a member of the family, but she's also separate and different, a servant, lower class, highlighting the more genteel status of the Marches, for whatever difficulties they're currently experiencing. Alcott is clearly interested in portraying class divisions, from the desperately poor family the March family takes their Christmas dinner to various sisters' ambivalences about the fact that they don't have as much money as some of their friends do, and as they wish they did. Of course, above the March family, we see families with more wealth. For example, the Lawrences. Well, I'm going on and on, but I always especially loved the housekeeper Hannah. When I was a child, everyone had a grandmother or a great aunt named Hannah, but no one knew anyone young with that name other than me. And now everyone around my age has a daughter named Hannah. But back then, it was really exciting for me to see Hannahs popping up in literature, especially Victorian literature. And so often they were side characters and often servants who were portrayed as strong and kind. And I liked that model. Question 5. Do you munch on snacks while you read? And if so, which of your favorite holiday confections do you enjoy this time of year? Well, I don't tend to munch on snacks much while I read, but I do have favorite Hanukkah treats, latkes and sufganiyot. Latkes are potato pancakes, and in a previous season of Hannah's Bookukkah, I put together a short little video of David and our son Abe making them to accompany our dinner. I am so glad to have this video, and I'll link to it down below, and in the cards if I can figure that out. Sufganiyot are jelly donuts. There are different ways to make them, but what I do is make little balls of yeasted dough and then deep fry them. And after they rise and start floating on the top, we take them out of the oil and promptly fill them while they're still hot with blueberry jam or whatever. Ginger marmalade was actually one of my very favorite experiments. We have a tiny little spoon with a kind of a sharp point. I'm not sure what it's meant for, but it's perfect for the filling job. We can slide that sharp point into the edge of the donut and then tilt it up and take it out, leaving the jam in the center. Then we toss all of the sufganiyot into a paper bag with sugar to coat them. Some people like powdered sugar, but I prefer regular granulated sugar. This year, I do not plan to make sufganiyot myself, but if I do next year, I'll try to film and show you what I just tried to describe in words. The sixth and final question. What's a holiday tradition you will never outgrow? And where did the tradition come from? The tradition that feels most significant to me now is actually a very simple one, a holiday walk. The first time I spent Thanksgiving with David and with David's family, back when we were first dating, a bunch of us took a stroll around the neighborhood after our large meal. Perhaps because it was our first holiday together, it felt like that tradition had to be repeated each year. And we did it for all of the holidays of the season, enjoying the brisk air and the evergreens around us. In later years, we had a little electric menorah on a timer, and we set it in the window. And when we walked out the door, the lights would be off. But by the time we arrived back home, when we walked up the driveway, we'd see the menorah in the window with the day's candles all alight. I suppose these brought back memories for each of us of our different childhoods, too. Although my family, when I was growing up, was not at all religious, we did love music and often went Christmas caroling with friends, walking from house to house and singing as we walked. And sometimes, during some late December night, we'd all go to the beach, which was nearby. My father would sometimes bring a few instruments, and we would sing and tell stories and walk by the ocean as the tide came in or went out, often with the moon shining overhead. I want to say one more thing. The holidays are a time of a lot of joy, but they're also a time of sadness for many of us. It's hard not to have the people we have loved with us, always, but especially at the holidays. The grief of the holidays is, well, I really see it as universal almost, as I talk with friends who've lost grandparents or parents or spouses or children, beloved friends, beloved pets. Some of our very favorite memories during the holidays are absolutely saturated with people who are no longer gathered around our table or tree or fire pit. This year, I'm trying to embrace those memories. Even though they sometimes cause some tears, they also bring love and joy and light. So I hope you have a meaningful season, all of you, whatever you celebrate or mark. See you again soon, tomorrow, for Bookukkah Day 2.